GG's, them Rock Nation subpoenas about to be cleared. Drake didn't just say that on a random stream like it was a throwaway joke. He said it like somebody behind the scenes just blinked first, and he couldn't wait to tell the room, yeah, I see what y'all tried. And the wild part is, within the same 48-hour pocket, What's the Dirt drops a documentary that's basically pointing at a whole invisible chessboard. Rock Nation, Reform Alliance, the gambling war around stake and sweepstakes models, law firm bloodlines, and even the PR pipeline that can turn a lawsuit into a national smear campaign on command. So now we've got two stories that look separate to casual fans, but if you connect them the way this doc is trying to connect them, the stakes stop being Drake versus Jay-Z internet fan fiction and start looking like industry versus the guy who refuses to play the game the normal way. Personal stakes, Drake's brand, Drake's money, Drake's leverage as the face of stake. Cultural stakes, hip-hop's obsession with who's really controlling the machine. Systemic stakes, how lawsuits, lobbying, and media distribution can get used like weapons in a market share fight. And the reason you're going to want to stay to the end is because there's one specific detail about who keeps showing up in the same rooms with the same tools at the same time that makes this whole thing feel a lot less like coincidence and a lot more like a coordinated play that got a little too loud and Drake just. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. All right, here's what's going on, and I'm going to keep it clean. We have confirmed public moments, we have reported claims from creators like What's the Dirt, and we have speculation that fans are running with. I'm going to label all three as we go, because I'm not here to cosplay as a lawyer or pretend a YouTube doc is a court ruling, but I am here to do what this space is actually about, pattern recognition. Because in hip-hop, the music is the headline, but the business is the plot. The surface story is simple. Drake goes live, he's talking spicy, he's doing the I dropped 3 on y'all album said hello and goodbye energy, and then he drops the line that matters for this video. Rock Nation subpoenas getting cleared. That's the first visible domino. The second visible domino is the documentary-style breakdown from What's the Dirt that tries to connect multiple entities, Rock Nation's orbit, the gambling regulation fight, and legal and PR infrastructure into one motive. Weaken stake, stain Drake as the biggest ambassador, and pressure parts of the outside-the-system music infrastructure that threatens the traditional label machine. And I know exactly what some of y'all are thinking. Here we go again, another Jay-Z secretly runs the universe thread. Relax, that's not even the most interesting angle. The interesting angle is the mechanism. How power moves in 2024, 2025 don't always look like a diss track. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like lobbying. Sometimes it looks like random plaintiffs and random press releases timed at the worst possible moment. And because we have so much to cover today, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming up, I'm going to build this the only way that makes sense. We start with what we can actually see, then we move into how the culture reacted, then we hit the pattern interrupt where it stops being rap drama and starts being market warfare. So first, the Drake stream moment. If you watch the clip, the energy wasn't nervous, it wasn't, oops, I said too much, it was confident, almost amused, like he was letting the audience in on a scoreboard update. GG's like the match is over, subpoenas about to be cleared, like somebody tried to pull a lever and the lever snapped. What are Rock Nation subpoenas? We don't have Drake sitting down with a time-stamped explanation, right? So we treat it as what it is, Drake publicly naming Rock Nation in the context of legal pressure. That alone is a headline, because Drake usually disses in a way that stays deniable. This wasn't deniable. He said the name. That's layer 1, visible and verifiable. Drake referenced Rock Nation and subpoenas in a public live moment. Now layer 1 also includes what happened next. People immediately tried to frame it like Drake is paranoid, like he's spiraling, like he's seeing enemies everywhere. But let me ask you something. Does Drake sound like a guy who thinks he's losing, or does he sound like a guy who thinks a move got blocked and he's mocking the attempt? Because those are two different reads, and the second one matters a lot more. Then there's the documentary that lit the gasoline. What's the Dirt essentially lays out a thesis that in his telling connects the gambling industry fight, especially around sweepstakes-style gray area operators, to music business power players who also have stakes in regulated betting.
The doc frames steak as a threat because it's operating in a loophole ecosystem that regulated companies once shut down. That part, broadly, is not a crazy concept. The gambling world is absolutely in a constant tug-of-war over licensing, market access, and who gets to operate where. Where it gets spicy is when the doc, and then commentary channels reacting to it, start pointing to Roc Nation's nonprofit Reform Alliance and saying, wait, why are these names and institutions popping up in proximity to legal actions that include Drake at the same time the gambling market is trying to kneecap steak? And I think we just need to set the truth on what is actually happening here, because if you're not careful, you'll let the internet collapse 5 different topics into one cartoon story.
Here's the grounded version. Roc Nation exists as a business. Reform Alliance exists as a criminal justice reform nonprofit co-founded by high-profile figures, including Jay-Z, and it is partnered with major names in corporate America. Fanatics exists as a sports commerce giant that has expanded into sports betting and gaming. Those are not conspiracies. Those are the board pieces. The leap, the allegedly, is the idea that these board pieces are being used in the same direction to apply pressure on a competitor like Steak, and that Drake gets hit because he's the face card. The doc claims it sees connective tissue, law firms, PR distribution, relationships, timing, and plaintiff backgrounds that look less like organic consumer outrage and more like engineered litigation. Now, before we go any deeper, let's talk about why this would even matter to hip-hop fans, because some of y'all hear gambling regulation and you check out. But this isn't a policy channel. This is hip-hop commentary. So translated into culture, if you can financially pressure the brand deals that keep an artist's empire lubricated, you can slow them down without ever out-rapping them. That's the part that should make you sit up. And here's the contrast one-liner that tells you where we're at. Rap beef used to be who has the better pen. Now it's who has the better attorneys and the cleaner PR pipeline. So let's lay out the documentary's core claims, carefully as claims. The doc argues that regulated gambling companies have incentive to eliminate gray area competitors. It points to alliances and lobbying efforts, again broadly plausible in the business world, then tries to connect that incentive to entities in Roc Nation's orbit through shared relationships and institutional overlap. One of the big connective tissue points raised is how a particular press release distribution platform gets used and who else uses it constantly. And that's where you start to see why Drake saying Roc Nation subpoenas hits differently. Because if he's aware of a legal pressure campaign, and the doc is arguing there's an ecosystem that can manufacture pressure through litigation plus publicity, then Drake naming the name looks less like random shade and more like a response to a specific play. Does everybody understand how crazy this actually is? The internet is used to artists subliminally dissing each other on records, but this is an A-list rapper implying he sees the legal machinery and he's pointing at the company. Now, the competitor script you pasted spends a lot of time praising What's the Dirt's editing and research. I'll say it like this. The reason that doc is landing is because it speaks the audience's favorite language right now. Follow the money and connect the dots. And hip-hop fans, especially post-streaming era, are obsessed with the idea that the charts, the media narratives, and the corporate alliances are all manufactured. But here's the thing. Connect the dots content can either be responsible pattern recognition or it can be a dopamine slot machine where every coincidence becomes proof. So as we move into layer 2, the cultural reaction, pay attention to what's actually happening. People are not just reacting to facts, they're reacting to the feeling that somebody's been manipulating the game for years. Layer 2 is where the temperature changes, because once Drake says Roc Nation out loud, fans take that as permission to go full detective mode. That's when Twitter Spaces, Reddit threads, TikTok breakdowns, and comment sections start doing what they always do, turning one line into a 40-piece narrative. And here's what's consistent across the cultural reaction. The Drake side reads it as vindication. See, we told you it's bigger than rap. The anti-Drake side reads it as deflection. He's blaming the industry because he can't handle criticism. And the neutral observers, who are usually the smartest ones in the room, start asking the only question that matters. What's the actual evidence chain and what's the motive? Because motive is everything. In the doc's framing, the motive is business.
If you're in regulated gambling, you want the gray area gone. If you're in a music business ecosystem that benefits from artists being dependent on traditional structures, you don't love independent-leaning models getting stronger. And if you can hit a competitor at the PR level while also applying legal pressure, you can shift public perception and partner confidence. That's the play, allegedly. Now, culturally, there's another layer to this. Roc Nation isn't just a company, it's a symbol. For some fans, it represents executive power in hip-hop, the boardroom era. For others, it represents legacy and excellence. So when Drake names Roc Nation, it's not just Drake versus a label, it's Drake versus the symbol of who gets to be untouchable. That's why the clip travels fast. And then you get the reactions that are less about evidence and more about tribalism. People start bringing up old tensions. Drake versus legacy media, Drake versus gatekeepers, Drake versus real rap narratives, Drake versus anyone who's ever tried to frame him as an outsider who got lucky, instead of a guy who learned the system and then outplayed it. Because love him or hate him, Drake is the guy who treats the game like a job. He shows up, he studies the room, he adjusts, he dominates a lane, and he makes it look casual. That's why when he hints at behind-the-scenes warfare, fans listen, because his entire career has been about understanding the machine better than the machine understands itself. But the villains in this story, if we're going to build the character universe, aren't Jay-Z personally twirling a mustache. Nah, the villain is what I'm calling the subpoena squad, the cluster of boardroom interests, legal pressure, and media distribution that can move without ever stepping on a stage. And their favorite move is plausible deniability. Nothing is ever their fault. It's always just business. It's always just compliance. It's always just a lawsuit. And their corrupt ally? The press release robot. That's the part nobody respects because it looks boring, but that's how narratives get manufactured. If you can inject a storyline into national coverage at the exact right time, you don't have to convince everybody. You only have to seed doubt. Now, let me give you the comedic reset before we go darker. The subpoena squad moves like the Avengers if the Avengers were all accountants. No capes. Just invoices. Just please see attached. Just please see attached. That's the superpower now. And oh, do I have more. Because we haven't even gotten to the strangest part of the doc's claim, the idea that some of the plaintiffs and legal entities involved in lawsuits that include Drake have backgrounds and relationships that look oddly connected. Again, I'm not stating that as a fact. I'm stating that as what the doc and the competitor script are emphasizing. These people know each other. Some are related, some share addresses, many have criminal records, and the timing of probation relief reforms overlaps with when legal actions get planned. That's a heavy claim. It's also the kind of claim that if you can prove it in court is explosive. But if you can't prove it, it becomes exactly what the internet loves, an unprovable story that still feels true because it matches people's emotions about how power works. So here's the cliffhanger setup we need before we pivot into layer 3. If the doc is right, then you're not looking at random citizens suing a celebrity. You're looking at a pipeline, a way for institutional power to identify vulnerable participants, attach them to a lawsuit.
Vehicle, amplify it through PR tools, and time it for maximum damage, while the real target is a business competitor like Stake, and Drake is collateral. And speaking of which, it seems like one of those disses actually landed, because the moment Drake says Roc Nation subpoenas, it's like he's telling us he's already aware of the pipeline, which means this isn't just fans guessing. This is Drake implying he's inside the situation enough to see the legal pressure moving. Now, we pattern interrupt because this is where most commentary channels get lazy. They stay in the drama, they farm the clip, they say Jay-Z versus Drake 50 times and call it a day. But the more serious read is, this is a case study in how modern entertainment conflicts happen when everybody involved is also tied to billion-dollar adjacent industries. Layer 3 is the industry and meta evidence, the part that isn't sexy, but it's the real story. Start with gambling. In the United States, gambling is a licensing maze. State-by-state rules, different categories, different enforcement regimes. The regulated giants spend a lot of money to get legal access, and they don't love competitors who operate in loopholes or in models that function like gambling without technically being labeled that in the same way. That tension is real. That's not even about Drake. That's just the market. Now overlay celebrity endorsement. Drake is one of the biggest celebrity ambassadors in the world. So if he's attached to Stake, then Stake gets legitimacy and cultural penetration. So if you're a regulated competitor or an alliance of regulated competitors, the easiest way to hurt the brand isn't necessarily to sue the brand directly in a way that's clean and simple. The easiest way is to turn the celebrity face into a liability, make partners nervous, make headlines uncomfortable, make it feel like controversy is always nearby. That's why lawsuit narratives matter, even when they fail. You don't always need to win in court to win in public perception. If the headline is "Lawsuit alleges X," you've already done damage. And then you let the press release robot do what it does: distribute, amplify, echo. Now, where Rock Nation comes into the meta in the docs framing is through relationships. Jay-Z being involved in ventures connected to betting and gaming via corporate partnerships and investments, and Rock Nation being connected to Reform Alliance, which is connected to criminal justice reform work. The doc's controversial connective tissue is suggesting those reform mechanisms could create access and proximity to certain populations, and that legal PR infrastructure overlaps in ways that can be used for strategic litigation. Let me be extremely clear. Criminal justice reform is not inherently sinister. Helping people get off probation early, expungements, job fairs, those are good things. The allegation is not reform is bad. The allegation is reform proximity can be exploited by powerful actors if they want to recruit, shape, or influence legal action. That's the accusation underneath the accusation. And if you're listening and you're like, that sounds like a movie, yes, it does. That's why it's going viral. But here's the part that makes people's eyebrows lift: the law firm ecosystem. The doc and competitor script focus on the idea that certain law firms and lawyers have shared lineage, people who worked at one place, then formed or staffed another place, then show up in cases and partnerships that brush against the same network of clients. In corporate America, that happens constantly. People move firms, networks overlap. That alone is not proof of coordination. The question is timing and targeting. Why does a particular platform get used at particular moments? Why are certain narratives pushed nationally for a tiny firm, if the doc's claim is accurate, when they don't usually do that? Why does it align with bigger industry fights? That's the real connect the dots game. Not two people shook hands once, but a sequence of choices that together produce one directional outcome. So, here's the major truth bomb reveal, and I'm going to frame it as analysis, not a verdict. What I think is happening here is not Drake is scared of Rock Nation. It's the opposite. Drake is basically signaling, I see the playbook. Because once you say subpoenas out loud, you're not in rap cap land anymore. You're in somebody tried to use the system against me territory. And that's where the identity disruption hits the audience. A lot of people still think of Drake as the industry's golden child, playlist prince, radio darling, algorithm king. But this story only makes sense if Drake is also, in key ways, a threat to certain structures. Not because he's independent, but because he's too big to control the normal way. He can partner where he wants, he can route attention where he wants, he can turn a platform into a cultural event without asking legacy media for permission. That's disruptive. So the Drake is the system narrative gets complicated because he benefits from parts of the system, yes, but he also refuses to be owned by it emotionally. He won't accept the gatekeeper storyline where they decide his legitimacy. And when you won't accept that, people who profit off legitimacy as a currency get annoyed. Now, if you're Rock Nation or any major legacy-adjacent power, your job is to protect your interests. That doesn't mean you're evil, it means you're consistent. And if you're in a world where Stake's model threatens regulated market share and Drake is the biggest cultural amplifier for that brand, then pressure around Drake isn't random, it's strategic. And the most devastating part, if the doc's framing is even partially true, is this: the battlefield isn't music. It's infrastructure. It's who has the ability to generate headlines, mobilize litigation, and influence the perception of what's legit and what's shady.
That's why Drake saying GG's matters. GG's is what you say when the game is decided, not when the round is starting. If he's saying GG's about subpoenas, he's implying he already knows where the pressure came from, and he believes it's getting neutralized. So who's the hero in this story? Not Drake the saint. Drake the operator. Drake the guy who does every job to 100%. Music, marketing, partnerships, timing, public psychology. He's unfazed because he treats chaos like weather. He adjusts and keeps it moving. And the villain isn't one person. It's the subpoena squad, the boardroom coalition that can't stand a competitor they can't regulate and can't stand a cultural figure they can't embarrass into compliance. Now, let's talk about the part that fans keep missing. Even if every single connection in that documentary is real, it still doesn't prove intent. It proves proximity. Intent is the hardest thing to prove, and that's why powerful entities love operating inside plausible deniability, because you can always say, "We didn't do anything." And technically, you might be able to say that truthfully, because the system does the work for you. People aligned in incentives don't need to sit in a room and plot like Scooby-Doo villains. If everybody's incentives point the same way, the outcomes can still align.
That's how the modern machine works. Manufactured narratives don't always require a mastermind. Sometimes they just require a shared interest and a reliable distribution channel. And that brings us back to the culture. Why do people believe this story so easily? Because they've seen the play before. They've seen rollout sabotage. They've seen selective outrage. They've seen how quickly headlines can turn into facts in the public mind. They've seen how labels and brands leak narratives. They've seen how media can be used like a pressure hose. So when a doc comes out that says, "Here are the names, here are the overlaps, here are the timelines," fans don't need it to be proven in court to feel like it fits reality. Now, here's my honest take. The documentary is compelling as a narrative, but viewers should be careful not to upgrade interesting connections into confirmed conspiracy without hard proof. At the same time, you'd have to be willfully naive to think industries this large don't use legal and PR tactics to protect market share. Both things can be true. So, what's the payoff? What does it all mean right now? It means Drake is publicly willing to name an institution tied to legacy power and hip-hop in a legal context, and he's doing it with a smirk. That alone signals a shift. It also means the gambling fight around gray area models is not just a business news story. It's bleeding into culture because celebrity endorsement turns corporate battles into fan wars. And it means the next phase of rap conflict might not come on a song first. It might come in filings, subpoenas, and press releases. The pen is still mighty, but the docket is undefeated. So, where does this go? This is only the start. Because if Drake is already saying subpoenas about to be cleared, that implies more information exists than what we have publicly. Maybe it's legal progress. Maybe it's internal clarity. Maybe it's just Drake doing what Drake does, getting ahead of a narrative before it becomes a cage. But watch what happens next. Do we get more direct naming? Do we see more creators digging into court docs? Do we see mainstream outlets touch this or avoid it? Do we see more random lawsuits with oddly perfect PR timing? Or do we see this whole thing fizzle because it can't cross the line from compelling story to provable fact? And for the Rock Nation side, if you're the subpoena squad, your biggest problem is that saying nothing can look like guilt in the court of public opinion, but responding can legitimize the story and give it oxygen. That's the trap with viral narratives. You don't control what people think anymore. You only control how loudly they think it. One more contrast one-liner before we land this plane. The old era was drop a diss and win the block. The new era is drop a narrative and win the quarter. So, here's what I want you to do. Go watch the original What's the Dirt documentary for yourself, because secondhand breakdowns always sand off the nuance. Then re-watch Drake's clip with fresh ears, not as a joke, not as a meme, as a signal. And ask yourself, Why would Drake choose that specific phrase, Roc Nation subpoenas, if there wasn't a real behind-the-scenes storyline he wanted the public to at least suspect? Because Drake is many things, but he's not careless with the kind of words that can turn into exhibits. If you want the follow-up video, I can do a deeper breakdown on the alleged pipeline idea, how PR distribution, lawsuit timing, and market incentives can align without turning it into conspiracy soup. And I can also do a separate video on how the gambling gray area crackdown could reshape celebrity partnerships across hip-hop, not just Drake. Because if Steak gets squeezed, it won't stop with one ambassador. Brands will start auditing everybody. And if you're going to watch one more video after this, go watch the breakdown on how rap media narratives get manufactured during rollout windows. Because once you see the playbook, you start recognizing the fingerprints everywhere. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Drake was trolling, or do you think he was signaling? And do you believe What's the Dirt found a real pattern, or just a really good story with coincidences that feel too perfect? Either way, keep your head on a swivel, because the next diss might not be a bar, it might be a headline.